When we think of AWS IAM, and if you are new to IAM or Identity and Access Management, let me first confuse you by making use of terms that will make you think twice about the importance of the core concepts rather than just listening to the jargon words. First, IAM helps you to provide fine-grained access control across all of the AWS. So in simple words, it means that you can carefully devise access to the smallest of components with precision. Next, you can manage access to your workforce and systems to ensure least privilege permissions. The least privilege is basically giving only that access to a resource so that it can perform the required operation. Let's suppose I just want a user to have single read-only permission to a particular resource. So I can do that. That is its least privilege. That brings us to the next point, which is it can provide us the flexibility of who can access which services and resources under which conditions. Last but not the least, IAM is a feature of your AWS account and is offered at no additional charges. Yes, IAM is a service that is provided by AWS for you to manage your access and permissions at no additional cost. Oh well, John is right here with us. Imagine this as you, or imagine this is you. And this is the AWS environment. As you can see here, we have the AWS services and resources. And what are you then? Yes, you are the user who is going to make use of the AWS services and resources. And in order to do that, you need to first make yourself a part of your AWS environment. So for that reason, we create the AWS user. And in other words, you create an IAM user who can access the resources you want. But not only you who is going to be using this, isn't it? There'll be a group or pool of users who will also want to access the AWS services and resources. And that will be the user group. And that as well will be using AWS IAM. So what did we understand here? If you need to use the AWS resources and services that are a part of your AWS environment, you need to have access to them. And who can help you? Yes, that's AWS IAM. Try and understand this situation. You could be the customer, you could be a developer or from the dev team, you could be from the testing team, you could be, from another team, another business unit. You could also be an architect who needs more access privileges than a normal user. Or as well, you could be from the security team who has to keep track of all the AWS accounts. And John here wants all of these users, user groups and accounts to be able to access the services in some or other way based on the use case. And how does he do that? Or how will he be able to do that? Yes, by using AWS Identity and Access Management. But provisioning access and managing the permissions of who can access what and how much permission they should be provided to complete their task is not as simple. So make sure you pay attention to the details we are going to discuss now. If we need to make use of the AWS resources, AWS is going to let you use its services only if you have permission to execute the operations that you want. You need to have the permissions to execute the operation that you want. And if you do have the permissions, AWS is going to let you use them. And how are we going to do that? Yes, you being the owner will create the AWS account, which in turn gives you the root access or AWS root account access. In the last video, I have already explained you how you can create the AWS account and create your IAM user and assign permissions to them. If you haven't watched that, please watch it again. The first thing that you need to do is you need to create the AWS account. Straightforward. For your users, you need to create the IAM user and IAM user group. To have multiple users in the same or different group, we can create IAM user groups as well. You need to create IAM roles to assume the role to perform operations on the resources and for other users to be able to make use of the services that you have on your AWS account. And you need to create or make use of the IAM policies to define the permission levels on what level of operations you can perform on a particular resource. So this is the whole gist of making use of IAM. But John is still not clear on how effectively we can do this. So let's move ahead and focus on the details. What AWS IAM tells us is that with AWS Identity and Access Management, you can apply fine-grained permissions to AWS services and resources. But you need to ask yourself that who and on what are you going to apply these fine-grained permissions? The who is going to be the workforce users with AWS SSO, that is single sign-on, or it could be the workloads with IAM role. You are a user. If you want to create an EC2 instance, you need to have access to the AWS account. If you are a user on IAM, you can log in using your credentials or by using single sign-on, federated login. And if you have the permissions to create EC2 instance, you can surely go ahead and create it. Let's suppose if you are hosting an application on EC2 and it needs access to an S3 bucket so that it can store files on the bucket, then you can create an IAM role that has the permissions to write on the AWS S3 bucket that you have and attach the IAM role to your EC2 instance. So it could be the workforce or the workload with IAM role. And that's where we define the policies, that is can access part, which provides permissions that are defined in your IAM policies. And on what? Yes, the what part is your resources within your AWS organization. And AWS has a very important line mentioned on the document, which says, with IAM, you define who can access what by specifying fine-grained permissions. IAM then enforces those permissions for every request. One of the basic ideas of IAM is access that you have is denied by default and access is granted only when permissions specify an allow statement. So you will define a permission in the policy and AWS is going to enforce them. AWS is not going to object you on anything. Remember that. It's not going to tell you what you can do and cannot do. It's you who is going to define them and let AWS enforce them. So if anyone asks you about AWS IAM, remember these words. Who can access what?